So, hi, I'm Filip, and I'll be talking about how we managed to make our design system a little bit more accessible. Just a disclaimer, this is mostly a case study, and we are far from being perfect in accessibility, so just keep that in mind. Quickly about me, I'm a front-end developer, as was already mentioned. I was also previously a designer, and I'm doing web stuff for about 7 to 8 years now. And lately I had the pleasure to work with KVA.com on their design system with an excellent team. Now, let me start a little personal. As you probably see, I'm a tall person, and surprisingly enough, I don't play basketball, even though I should according to everyone I meet. But being a tall has its own issues. You simply don't fit. It's hard to commute, it's hard to travel, it's hard to watch movies, and it's fun to use regular size doors. The reason why I'm telling you all of this is that even though I might seem normal, I have some limitations in this world. And those limitations probably help me with empathy for disability or towards disabled people. And the reason why, and that was the reason probably I have chosen to work on accessibility in the first place. Because when I joined Orbit, and as Honza already mentioned, all the buy-ins and all the issues were already solved, so I had really easy time to focus on accessibility and move the product somewhere else. And the reason for it was, as Honza mentioned, they had it on their core principles from the day one, and they had it in their roadmap. But they simply didn't have the capacity to learn about accessibility and solve those issues. Even though we were in a good position, we still had some roadblocks. When we tried to implement those changes to our production, we ran into some issues. We were questioned often, such as this, about what's the value and why we should even care about accessibility. My answers to this were usually a generic one, talking about potential missed revenues, or just the principle, which are hard to measure. Luckily, we had some more leverage due to our business development team. They came with a requirement for their new potential client who had an accessible needs. For us, it was a perfect timing. We were in the middle of it all, so this served as a leverage and promo to our actions. Takeaway from all of this is to me that it's important to tie the accessibility to your business case. It will make your life much more easier, and it will enable you to make a change where the people are not usually used to making a website accessible. Now, let's talk about the process. How do you actually go about and make your design system accessible? I first started by trying to understand the users and how they work. I have chosen the most different user group. For me, it were the users who are using screen readers. And that's because you can probably understand why color contrast is an issue, but it's way more harder to understand why correct labels are important. Because what you see here is probably some close button, but if it's not properly labeled, screen reader will be just like a button, which makes any navigation impossible. Luckily, screen readers are everywhere on your computer, and I encourage you to try them on, because it's such a different experience from what do you normally do on web, which is hard to convey from this presentation. Next step on the research train was visiting WCAG. And well, WCAG is a standard, so it's quite long and quite scary. And I was discouraged by everyone to actually go through the standard. But for me, it's the most complete source of accessibility out there. everything you are going to be solving is already there, solved, and within examples. However, I don't really recommend going through the actual standard because that's not how you should read standards anyway. But I recommend using this quick reference guide because it will allow you to filter and you can see the information in a more clear and quick way. When researching, I also found an interesting patterns which I didn't really knew they existed, such as skip link. This is a link at the top of the page which enables you to skip to the main content. So it works as skip for like those navigation blocks or blocks which are repeated on every web page. So you don't have to click that for like 15 times. And a variation of a skip link is what I call skip navigation. I didn't really find out the real naming for it. And the function behind it is the same as skip link. So, keyboard navigation users have a better time to navigate their web, but this is more useful in a more complex web apps where you don't just want to skip to the main content, but you probably want a user to skip to different sections of the website. Now, after the initial understanding and research, I went through all of our components in our library, and with the help of those tools, I was able to gather a quick overview of the state of our components. Lighthouse is actually present in Chrome, so you can use it very quickly and easily, and it actually uses the X under the hood. But it has a little bit different UI, and it's maybe a little quicker. So yeah, I recommend trying them out. This is, for example, a report from the Lighthouse, and with this and my previous knowledge, I was able to identify issues on each component. So I made basically an issue for each component, so I could return back after my analysis and start to resolve those issues. Now, through my journey of going through every component and the whole our production, I found out that some issues were popping out again and again, such as missing labels or incorrectly used labels, non-contrasting colors, this, which for non-developers is actually destroying any outline for tab navigation, so you cannot physically navigate through web if this is present. I understand why people want to get rid of it because it's ugly, but there are probably more subtle ways to get away with it. And when it comes to custom components such as sliders, drop-downs, or calendars, I usually found out that they didn't work with keyboard navigation. The situation is getting a little better, but most of the time it's still not ideal. Luckily, these issues are easy to spot and fix. It just needs time. And which brings me to setting your standard, because you are putting these resources to fixing those issues, and you don't want to you don't want to make new issues, and you don't want to introduce new components without accessibility, because that will be problematic. So yeah, we set a standard and said to ourselves we just simply cannot release a new component without thinking about accessibility. And after some time, congratulations, you did it, right? Well, not really. You now have an accessible design system, but even though everyone will update it and use your library, you will still have an accessibility issues. But why? Because accessibility is a little bit more complicated than it might seem. You can solve everything with just components. It's still up to a correct implementation. So you now have a different problem, a people problem. And you have to convince everyone who will implement those things or give you resources to implement those things that it's a good idea to do so. Good luck. Because everyone will see it totally differently, and on top of that, you have to make sure that it's correctly implemented, because then it wouldn't make any sense. And at this point, it took me hours of reading specifications, learning about accessibility, and not everyone has this luxury. So it's our responsibility as maintainers of design systems to get the right message to the right people at the right time. In our case, we went through the whole production, found out all the accessibility issues, and reported them to responsible teams with also described solutions. With this, we also had already documentation ready, so if the developer starts working on it, they can just reference our documentation and found out how to use the accessibility features we implemented months before. And we are also helping them with code review if they want to. This is also an interesting approach from Ray, where they have this table in their documentation about share the responsibilities of the design system and the product team. And at this point we had a lack of developers fluent in web accessibility. So we are trying to profile ourselves as the people who are able to help or discuss the solution with our developers. And the discussion is an important factor here, because you don't want to fall into the trap of fixing those issues for them. It's still about educating, which can be done through code review, documentation, or internal workshops. And after some time, hopefully it comes back. This is my colleague asking me for accessibility code review, which for me was a small victory. It meant that it was somehow worth it, and maybe we can really change something and make our product accessible. Now, I'm almost done, and I was thinking about how to wrap this presentation up. And for me, the key points of making a design system accessible are first, the accessibility is very well covered topic, and even though challenging, it benefits more users than you might think. Secondly, it's not the technical part, but most importantly, the people part, which I didn't saw when I was starting out on this challenge. Lastly, let me leave you with this. The web is accessible by default, and we should keep it that way. Thank you.